Right. It is. Yeah, we're going to get started here in a few minutes. Live at the Walsh House in Garner. All right, you guys ready to go? Patrick, you ready?
I'm ready. Yeah.
Cool. All right.
This is a dialogue. It's not a debate.
There's no evidence.
God commanded genocide of people multiple times in the Bible.
He wants to be his own God. He doesn't want to submit to an authoritative God who created him.
They are possessed by a demon. I'm going to cast that thing out.
Is there anything your child could do that would make you want to lock him in the closet and set the house on fire?
No.
Oh, then I think Nick definitely has a better morality than your God.
Well, you ask really good questions.
We were out there 4 days later, and the guy walked out, and he had a full nose. I didn't even recognize him.
The Miracles and Atheists podcast, unpacking the tension between different worldviews of the supernatural.
And we're here. Welcome to the Miracles and Atheists podcast. This is where truth seekers and storytellers come together to unpack the tension between different worldviews, typically of the supernatural. But today we're doing it live at the Wash House Laundromat in Garner, North Carolina. My name is Nick Snap. I host this Miracles Atheist podcast. I'm into solving Rubik's Cubes and hosting uncomfortable conversations, which may or may not be one. I think we're going to have a good time. But great big thanks to Wash House owner Luke Williford right here.
Thanks.
He's monitoring our live stream comments here today. So I really appreciate all the support and everything we're doing here. We're inside. It's a little chilly. It's about 45 degrees outside. We were going to do it outside with the tent, but here we are. So I appreciate everybody coming out. Good time. So, wow. So I was invited to have this interesting conversation about something I've never really thought all that much about until our guest here, Patrick Walsh, texted me indicating that he's interested in coming in on Miracles and Atheists and debating in favor of veganism. He added on his text, and I quote, "It's not exactly a religious topic, but it touches on morality and ethics." So I thought about it for a little while. I thought it was maybe a little bit of a strange request, but I'd actually been praying that it'd be easy to find and book guests. So, both atheist and non-Christian. So here you are, Patrick. I'm grateful you're able to, respond to the prompting there.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today.
Absolutely, man. So you're here. I'm guessing most people that are joining Patrick are here because he leads the Vegan for the Animals meetup group. Is that right? Who's here from that? Awesome. All right, y'all can get loud. I mean,
hey, and if they need to seat, feel free to move any of these seating units around. Make yourself comfortable.
But just so you all know, this is actually Patrick's third time on Miracles and Atheists. He's also the founder of the Atheists, Agnostics and Apostates group of Raleigh. So, Patrick, a quick intro for you. I mean, you can introduce yourself, but you consider yourself agnostic atheist, meaning you don't know if God exists, which makes you agnostic, but you also see no good reason to believe, which makes you atheist. I'm excited you're here. It's a unique experience, and by a show of hands, if you feel compelled to raise your hand, are there any vegan atheists here today? All right. Well, welcome again. Thanks to everybody coming out. I think we're going to probably learn something today. It's really what this is all about. Find people who think differently from yourself and get outside your own echo chamber and talk about important things. And veganism and animal rights is certainly one of those things. So before we get started, I just want to give everybody a quick reminder, if you don't know already, of what's coming this year for Miracles and Atheists. If you don't know, we're making Miracles and Atheists the movie. And it's a documentary that's going to bring atheists and Christians together in search of truth and the miraculous. So if the God of the Bible exists and his followers are experiencing the supernatural power, atheists and non-believers should be able to experience that too, right? So that's the question the movie aims to answer. And we're getting prepared to travel the world, at least the country, hopefully the world. We've got a couple world destinations in mind, and capture on film the first time an atheist genuinely experiences the power of God. It'll be chock full of fascinating dialogue and important questions. When we head out in search of miracles, we're committed to capturing what actually happens, right? No matter what it is, our goal is to allow our audience to witness this experience, both from the Christian and the atheist, and decide for themselves. We're not going to skew it. It's not, obviously, I'm a follower of Jesus, so I want people to follow Jesus. But as far as the film goes, we're trying to keep it as objective as possible. So if God exists, then we'd like to be able to see that from the atheist side. So does anybody here have any pain or chronic illnesses or anything like that? Do you? Okay. So what I like to do on the show at the end, we can do some prayer and see if we can experience right now the miraculous power of God. So love to give an opportunity there to do that for you. So yeah, we're going to be launching a crowdfunding campaign. Neil Galarte out of Tampa, Florida. He's the director of the film, and it's an expensive endeavor. So if you want to support the film for whatever reason, the crowdfunding campaign is coming out soon, but you can do that by going to patreon.com/Miracles and Atheists, and you can support the epic project we're about to release here. So that being said, Patrick, anything you want to add before we kind of get into the discussion about veganism?
No, ready to get started.
Right on. Well, so how long have you been studying animal rights activism and that kind of thing?
Well, so I've been a vegan for just about 2 years now, so not very long, not as long as some of the other activists out there. There are activists out there who have been, vegan for years and years, or even decades.
Right.
I guess I would say that I've been studying it and been aware of it for maybe 2.5 years or so. There were some things that kind of led up to me being open to the idea of being vegan. I mean, yeah, if you asked me like 3 years ago, probably I would have like laughed at you, like, what, vegan? Like, I thought that was a silly thing, honestly. I'd heard people talk about it, and I just thought it was. I thought it was a joke, honestly. I didn't think it was really. It was not something I took very seriously. I didn't really think about the animals and what they had to go through, and but obviously I feel very different about it now, and so that's what I'm here to talk about. Yeah,
differently enough to invite yourself to come on the podcast. So we appreciate that, man. I've been studying for about a week because of animal rights. So I'll preface this conversation by admitting that I'm not an expert. I'm a God-fearing omnivore. I do my best to look at things objectively, but I recognize that my worldview does inform the way I see modern-day issues in society. And as we all kind of tend to do, we feel comfortable in our echo chambers, right? We feel comfortable congregating around people who think like we do. And that's really one of the primary reasons for developing this platform, Miracles and Atheists, is because we really need to have these conversations, regardless of the level of comfort or the risk of painful scrutiny by activist groups such as this one here. And all that being said, I do believe that your primary reason for choosing veganism, Patrick, and probably everybody sitting here, is a noble cause. I mean, animal exploitation is horrific. It's something that I don't agree with. I don't want to see animals suffer. I don't want to see anyone suffer, really. So I can see why you're passionate about fighting for animals. However, as a Bible-believing, God-fearing follower of Jesus, I believe my primary purpose here on earth is to look out for those who are created by God, or created in the image of God. So the first priority for those image bearers of God is spiritual, and then the second for me is physical. So that's kind of how my lens is. It's not a statement of advocacy for animal cruelty. Obviously, it's just a reflection of, or a reflection of speciesism, which I had to look up after you put that in your. It's kind of a statement of precedence for me. It's like fighting against human suffering is the priority. Although God gave man dominion over everything that grows and moves on this earth, there's one exception. Man does not have dominion and never has been given dominion over other men. So man controlling man fully manifests in man's desire to be like God. It's a demonic scheme, and it's as old as the Garden of Eden. So to use your words, Patrick, a social justice issue, that's what it is for me. That needs to be exposed. Man's desire to control man. So why do I bring this up in a conversation about veganism? Well, because the noble cause that you all are after, animal exploitation, and to eliminate that unnecessary animal suffering, it's actually been hijacked by a small group of elites with unlimited resources who want to surveil and control mankind. They want to become gods, and they'll do anything in their power to achieve their goal, which includes promoting and weaponizing veganism to fabricate crisis propaganda conveniently tied to veganism that will actually advance their agenda. Most notably, there's a lot of things they're doing with the climate change narrative and villainization of subjugation of those who eat meat. Guilt and fear are every marketer's greatest tools. So while I can see myself rallying around a cause to minimize animal suffering.
Could I interrupt you for 1 second?
Yeah.
I just wanted to know, so you say the subjugation, and what was the other word you used, of people who eat meat?
Villainization.
Yeah. What do you mean by subjugation of people who eat meat? What does that look like?
I guess another word could be marginalization, right? Like open attacks. I mean, you've seen people rioting. I've seen people in the UK breaking down windows and throwing paint on buildings and vandalism and stuff, and they're vegans. And I don't, not the exploitation, but just when it's a violent or aggressive attack on people who eat meat, that's what I'm really disagreeing with.
Yeah, so I'm with you there. I am against using violence to try to promote social justice. Now, social justice movements of every sort throughout history, whether it's the abolitionists in the 1800s in the UK and in America, whether it's civil rights activists in America in the 50s, those protests and those events sometimes did become violent, and people use that to try to delegitimize the message.
Right.
So I'm not for violence. I'm for peaceful demonstration. I'm for conversation, but I think it's I think it's a little bit like almost missing the point in a way to say that, well, sometimes vegans are violent. Yeah, sometimes vegans are violent. And I think a lot of it is driven by extreme passion from seeing extreme cruelty and extreme exploitation.
Right.
But I think to say that meat eaters are being marginalized, I think if anything, someone like me, I am in favor of having conversations that will at times make people uncomfortable.
Right.
I'm not really a confrontational person by nature, but I can be a little bit confrontational when I'm talking about, something that I care about, animal cruelty. And so people can take that as like, oh, you're marginalizing, you're judging me. But you know what? If you have the right to force pigs in a gas chamber and they don't have any say in that, or chickens to be hung upside down against their will and have their throats slit, they don't have any say in that. Then I have the right to have a conversation with you and hold you accountable, or at least challenge your views on the legitimacy of having that system in place.
I agree with that. And I think to clarify again, and I think you made it pretty clear, is that, my problem is with people who are attacking meat eaters, getting violent, and that kind of thing. And I appreciate that statement. I mean, I think my whole point of what I'm saying here is that I find myself hyper skeptical about any mainstream narrative coming from the secular world. And especially when it comes alongside of a very severe, aggressive marketing campaign. When it's overly pushed by the mainstream media, I believe it's my responsibility to make people aware of deception, regardless of how good the cause is, right? Or seems to be. So ultimately, for me as a follower of Jesus, it's a spiritual agenda. So that's really why that's why I agreed to have you on, Patrick.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And one point that I want to make off the bat too is that although I'm an atheist, my atheism really has nothing to do with my veganism. As you mentioned, it's about animal cruelty and animal exploitation. I'm not here to turn anyone into an atheist. I really don't care about that, honestly. It's something that I've cared about less and less, honestly, over the years. But I do care about animal cruelty. And so there are many Christian vegans. It's completely compatible with a view of the Bible. If you're a Bible-believing Christian, if you believe that God made all of creation, he made the animals, he made humankind, he gave, I think you used the word dominion over the animals. He gave man dominion over the animals. But what does dominion mean? Does that mean you are abusing those who are in your subjugation, or does that mean stewardship? Does that mean taking care of the people that you're entrusted with, or the beings that you're entrusted with? Parents in a sense have stewardship over their children. They have, I wouldn't use the word dominion, but you could kind of in a sense say dominion. They make choices for their children. But any parent who abuses that power, we rightly condemn that, and we say that's it's child abuse, child neglect. And I think what is happening right now, and what has been happening throughout basically all of human history, is that we have a speciesist system that subjugates animals and commodifies them and treats them basically as just objects, and we don't really value them as individuals. And so I'm here challenging that system of subjugation and violence and cruelty, and saying we were not put on this earth for animals to serve us. I think even from a biblical perspective, I think you can. I don't think that's really biblical. I think if you look at Genesis 2:16, God said, I give you the Garden of Eden, and every tree I give that bears fruit, you are to eat of that tree. He didn't say, go eat all the animals. He didn't say anything about that. He said, go eat the fruits of the trees. There is actually a pretty strong case from a biblical point of view to say that pre-fall of man in the Garden of Eden was a vegan world, basically. There was no violence, there was no death. And in Isaiah 11:6, it talks about the wolf will lay down with the lamb, and the second coming and the end times. The leopard will lay down with the goat, the calf and the lion will eat together. It talks about this reuniting of nature, how it was corrupted after the fall of man, and how it's turned into this violent thing where different species are fighting against, are exploiting each other, abusing each other. But it won't be like that. And in Revelation 21, my favorite chapter in the whole Bible, it's beautiful verses. It talks about there will be no more death, no more suffering, no more sorrow, no more pain. It talks about a pacifying of the earth, a new heaven and a new earth, where people are no longer killing each other. Animals, nature is not at war with itself. So I think even from a biblical perspective, I think you can get behind what I'm talking about here. So
I appreciate that. Did you hear my atheist friend just rattled off 4 or 5 scripture? That's impressive. So that's just moment of silence for that, maybe. But so and you know why at the beginning of the scripture you quoted as far as pre-fall, or the pre-fall of mankind, right? The first animal that was killed was by God when he made skins for Adam and Eve to cover their themselves when they felt ashamed to be in his presence. So God was actually the first one to kill animals. I've been wrestling with this, Patrick, since you kind of brought it up. I'm like, man, because I've heard the debates, and I'll just bring it right out there. Okay, yes, God, according to the Bible, gave man permission. And I'll clarify one thing too, Patrick, that you said earlier. So although God changed the way that we interact with animals, in that they're now, they could be meat, we still bear a responsibility to treat animals humanely. Human rule over animals does not mean that we have the right to mistreat or misuse those animals. So I think the problem that we're seeing now is that we're in a position where we're in a country that, and it kind of due to a lot of things that I said already, is we have a very small group of people controlling everything, right? They control all basically 7 forms of society: government, education, media, entertainment. What am I missing? Religion. So I really do have 5 of them. So there's a very small group of people that own everything, right? So they've set up a system now where money is king and exploitation of man is king, just as a society, the people that want to control. So I'm trying to think where I was going here. When it comes to eating meat as a whole, Patrick, and humane eating of meat, I can't make an argument that I'm for slaughterhouses, because I'm really not. It's an argument of ignorance, right?
It's hard to have slaughterhouse, or it's hard to have meat consumption without slaughterhouses.
Exactly. So what is the model for humane meat consumption? I mean, it's death, right? No death is humane. So it's a matter of, are they suffering when they're dying? Are they hanging upside down, on meat hooks while they suffer and are in pain and all that kind of stuff? I don't want to see that kind of stuff. But I, as a normal omnivore, I would really need to take a lot of time and research to go in there and figure out where's my meat coming from, and how do I not support the exploitation of animals? That's just a piece of knowledge that,
well, it's actually very easy to do. I mean, you don't buy it. You don't support the system. There's no such thing as humane meat. There's no way to kill someone against their will, force them in a situation where their sole purpose in life, their very short time on earth, is meant to serve you and make you money and feed you. There's no way to do that in a humane way. If you talk about the lifespan of these animals, do you know what the natural lifespan of a cow is? If you had to guess?
5 years?
About 20 years.
Okay.
Do you know how old they are when they're sent to slaughter?
About a year.
Yeah, about 12 to 18 months on average, yeah.
Right.
What about with chickens? What do you think the natural lifespan of a chicken is, if you had to guess?
Probably about 5 years.
About 10 years, if they're allowed to live out their natural life. Do you know how old they are when they're sent to slaughter?
Months.
On average, 47 days.
Yeah.
So even if you have a farm that is pristine and green grass and the animals are roaming around happy, which, by the way, it doesn't happen. That's a myth. That's marketing propaganda. Even if that happened and these animals were living happy, peaceful lives, you take away that life, you're dooming them to an existence where they are living very, very short lives. And the day that they're born, someone has already put on the calendar the day that they're going to die.
Right.
What's humane about that? How can anyone justify that? When it's not necessary. It's not necessary because you don't have to do it. You can live off plants. I've been doing it for 2 years. A lot of people have been doing it for decades. Weird Al has been vegan since the 90s. Weird Al Yankovic.
Can the whole world be vegan? Is it possible?
It has to be vegan because the current system we have is unsustainable. The amount of water and resources that go into trying to support meat consumption, especially in countries like the United States, where our meat consumption is far higher than, like, say, in the third world.
Right.
It's a completely unsustainable system. We're destroying our oceans. Commercial fishing is decimating marine life. Fishing nets account for around 47%, 46%, something like that, of the plastic in the ocean. The problem is not straws, by the way. It's fishing nets. That's the problem. That's what's killing our oceans and commercial fishing. We have to switch to a vegan world. Right now, there have been studies on this. This is not me just saying this. You can look this up. We are growing enough plants to feed 10 billion people on the earth. But most of those plants right now are going to feed animals, which then in turn go to feed humans. It's about 1,800 gallons of water to produce 1 pound of beef. There's nothing sustainable about that. We
How
can't.
so? How's that work?
So the amount of plants that need to be grown and also water to give to the animal over the course of that lifespan, that 12 to 18 months, it's about 1,800 times whatever the poundage of your average cow is. So it's an extremely resource intensive, very inefficient process. Where if you want to talk about just the economics of it, like let's set aside the morality and how they're treated for a second, just economics, economically, it's not sustainable. It's extremely inefficient. It's like throwing $100 bills into a shredder and then out comes pennies.
So what percentage of plants would not be grown if it weren't for livestock?
I don't know the exact percentage of the plants, but I know that the majority of plants that are grown right now go to feed animals. So if you stop doing that, if you stop producing, it's like 50 to 70 billion land animals per year, something like that, worldwide animal agriculture. If you stop growing all these or breeding all these billions of animals into existence, you could take those plants and you could feed humans. We could solve world hunger.
How would that negatively impact the economy though, and people? You said look at it through economics. Every restaurant would close tomorrow with no meat.
Well, first of all, they wouldn't close because they could switch over to plant-based options. They don't have to serve meat. But the economy option is the exact same thing, and I'm not accusing you of anything, but it's the exact same thing that pro-slavery people did back in the day when the abolitionists said we need to end slavery today, right now. People said, oh, that's going to affect the economy. People are going to lose jobs. Well, I don't care. When it's something this atrocious and this monstrous, there are bigger things at stake. People can find new jobs. I'm not saying it won't affect people. It will. But this is something that is completely unjustifiable. You can't enslave billions and trillions of animals and then just say, well, people rely on it for jobs. People make money off of it. It's not a good justification.
So you described unnecessary suffering, Patrick. How do you define unnecessary suffering of animals?
I think unnecessary suffering would be, and by the way, it's more than just unnecessary suffering. I think it's also about animal rights violations, so we can talk about that as well. But unnecessary suffering is when you're causing suffering that is not justified. It's not for survival. You're not out in the wilderness when you have to kill an animal to hunt and in order to survive. We can talk about ethics of specific hypothetical situations and,
Sure.
and things like that. But when you go to a grocery store, if you're a privileged Westerner like we are, we're living here, we have plenty of options. The cheapest options in the grocery store are plants, by the way. You go to produce and fruits and rice and beans, and this stuff's dirt cheap. Tofu, you can buy tofu at H Mart and other grocery stores, and it's dirt cheap. Now the vegan meats, the vegan alternatives, those can be a little bit expensive. I'll admit that. We don't have the kind of subsidies in place that make the meats and cheese, plant-based meats and cheeses, more affordable.
What kind of meats are you talking about?
Impossible Burgers, the Beyond Chicken, chicken fingers, things like that. Those, I admit, if you compare those side by side, they tend to be more expensive than regular meat. But there's a lot of subsidies in place that make that so. But in terms of like just practicability and what is unnecessary, it's not necessary to pay for animals to be killed when there are plant alternatives. When you're living in the West, when you're privileged, even if you're not well off, by comparison, people in the third world, people who live remote parts of the world,
right.
Inuits, things like that, they may not have any other options or very few options, but we have options. So that's why it's unnecessary. You might like the taste of meat. Although if you really love burgers, I challenge you to try an Impossible Burger. Like, they're getting pretty good now. It's not like what it used to be. I remember eating a tofu hot dog when I was a kid, and I was like, this is disgusting. But they're not like that anymore. There's plenty of restaurants that make some amazing food. But so you might like the taste of it, but taste is not a good justification. Just it's something that you like. It's not something that you need.
So impossible meat is an option. Is being vegan possible without this new meat now in this society?
Totally. People have been vegan, like I said, for decades. Even hundreds of years. It's the vegan society, I think, was started sometime in the 1950s, and there were very few options back then. You had to go to specialty stores to try to find like soy milk, and it was a lot harder to be vegan back in the day. But I try not to eat too many of the like the plant-based alternative meats and cheeses. I try not to eat too much of them because I know they're not always the healthiest. They tend to have a lot of sodium. They can be processed and whatnot. So I try to eat mostly whole plant foods. But absolutely, there are people who are more health-minded. People who do it kind of. It might be a mixture of like ethical reasons, environmental reasons, health reasons, and those tend to be more mindful of. I want to eat more whole plant-based foods, things that are not processed. So you can absolutely do that.
Well, I think one of the reasons that kind of going back to what I said, bringing up the Impossible Foods and Beyond Meats, it's synthetic biology is really how those are produced, right? So there's genetically modified GMOs, but they're calling it synthetic biology because there's a little bit of a difference between GMOs and synthetic biology. And that industry is estimated to be worth $85 billion annual. It's creating all these artificial meat products. So synthetic biology, it's really comes from a very small, if you look at how synthetic biology works, it's getting into like the modification of DNA, right? So the meats that you're putting in, you ask, why does it taste good? Why is it getting pretty good? It's not beet juice. That didn't work. Like it's not the sort of bloody replication of a real cut of meat. I think there's a rumor that it's beet juice, but that's been proven that it actually does not work. That's not the blood. So what the blood's coming from is heme, and that's a modification of the DNA structure of, I think, a root of, what is it? A specific type of root. I think it's from maybe a soybean root, and modification of the DNA of, I think it's grain of some sorts. But even further than that, I think one of the things that really struck me as I'm looking at, again, kind of going back to what I'm talking about, there's a small group of people with a lot of money that want to make a lot of money and invest. The specifically Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods, they earn their funds from venture capitalists and investors such as Bill Gates. Impossible Foods is estimated at $4 billion right now and $10 billion when it goes public. It's not public just yet. Beyond Meat right now has an $8.16 billion net worth. So what I believe is happening is, when I talked about hijacking your good cause, because you do have a good cause, right? You have a propaganda campaign set up around veganism because they're trying to make money off of these sort of alternative substances, and it's because it's genetically modified. So can plant-based products have meat in them?
You mean meat in the type of way, like with the heme from like Impossible Burgers, or just like meat? Like, I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Well, if something is plant-based, they don't have the manufacturer. First of all, they don't have to disclose that they're synthetic biology technology. They don't have to disclose that. It's legal, but it's not ethical. So what's giving them flavor? Is there meat inside of these products? There's evidence to show that there actually could be some sort of meat in these products. Specifically, going outside the meat, a lot of these products, the way that they're flavored and seasoned, they actually have human embryonic kidney inside for taste. And there's a lot of products that have this. There's Coke, Pepsi, root beer. There's a lot of the Nestle products. There's a ton of products that have human embryonic kidney in them. But that's basically an aborted fetus cell. And those products are done to enhance your taste receptors. So those sort of products are in a lot of these, and definitely in the Impossible and
Yeah, I mean, I would say if you're concerned about that, then don't buy those specific products. I mean, first of all, there's quinoa, black bean patty burgers. There's other options where it really is just plants. You know, there's cashew queso. It's cashews ground up with water and lemon. You make like a cashew like queso dip, and it's actually pretty good. It tastes pretty close to the same thing. I mean, you can tailor your diet in a way that if you're concerned about specific types of products. I mean, even vegans, some vegans don't like the Impossible Burgers for various reasons. They had, by law, the FDA required that there was some testing done on animals in order to get some of these products to market. And, there's a debate among vegans, like, oh, should we even support these products? And I get that, but I think it's a bit of a distraction. It's not really something I'm as concerned about, because you can talk about sort of secondary or like effects that happen or things that get into the food that you're like, well, I'm not so sure, I'm quite sure about this. But when you're presented with a clear alternative, when you're talking about meat, is from animals that without a doubt suffered, without a doubt were exploited, had their lives cut short, I would rather go with a product that is, maybe not quite as healthy, maybe is, and I'm not saying that those are less healthy. We can talk about the health adequacy of vegan diets, and I actually have one of the handouts I have here is, you maybe have heard this, maybe not, is it's from the position of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, and it's a study that was done. It's been done multiple times, but this is the largest body of dietitians. One of the largest bodies of dietitians in the world, and they look at meta-analysis of different studies, and they look at what is the healthiest diet to have. My position, to be clear, is not necessarily that the vegan diet is the healthiest. I think there's probably a good argument for that, although that's not really my reason for pushing for it. It's the ethical reasons and the environmental reasons as we talked about. But at the very least, this is definitive. I think this is without a doubt the vegan diet. What can be said without any reservations is that it is nutritionally adequate. So I'll just read a quick excerpt. This is from the abstract of this study, and people can look it up. They can look at the handout. But it says, it is the position of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics that appropriately planned vegetarian, including vegan, diets are healthful, nutritionally adequate, and may provide health benefits for the prevention and treatment of certain diseases. These diets are appropriate for all stages of life cycle, including pregnancy, lactation, infancy, childhood, adolescence, older adulthood, and for athletes. Plant-based diets are more environmentally sustainable than diets rich in animal products because they use fewer natural resources and are associated with much less environmental damage. So that's not a vegan group. That's not vegan propaganda. That's from a scientific body of peer-reviewed research.
But certainly, there's clearly people out there who have been vegan. I studied, again, I've only been studying this for a week. I'm just trying to understand what's going on with this. But there's one study that I read particularly struck me. There was a woman that was vegan for 18 years. And she started having ridiculous problems with health, and her hair was falling out and things like that. And she stopped, and the problems stopped. Jordan Peterson, Jordan Peterson, right? His daughter is pushing. She did a TEDx talk about it. She's 100% on meat because she was having incredible problems, like all kinds of rashes and pain and unspeakable things that were happening to her, and they're happening over her entire life. And she started basically diagnosing herself, and she finally got 100% back on meat. So, and she stopped having those problems. So I would grant you that there's probably situations with certain body types and blood types and things like that that would support veganism never having any health problems at all. But there's certainly cases where going back to a meat diet have actually helped people.
I mean, for every Michaela Peterson in the world, that you could probably find 100 people that switched to a vegan diet and they were able to reverse their effects on, cancer and heart disease and all kinds of other health problems. So there may be outliers. I'm not really as concerned about the outliers when I talk to people about it, because the point that I like to try to make with people is, let's not talk about specific hypothetical situations if it doesn't apply to you.
Sure.
Because you can talk about, but what about, Inuits living out in the Arctic, could they live off of plants? Like, well, are you an Inuit? Well, does that apply to you? Like,
I get that, Patrick, but ultimately the only reason I believe that's valid for veganism for me, and it's because what I mentioned earlier is because the exploitation of people and the deception of humans is animal cruelty. I think the health benefits that are popularized and propagandized by some of these small groups and the climate change narrative around veganism, I think that's a fear tactic that gets people into fear and is an attempt to control people. I think you have a good argument when it comes to animal cruelty. I don't have a lot of answers to that, other than I think we need to continue to talk about it. But for those other cases, like I said, again, when the mainstream media is pushing a campaign a certain way, I start getting hyper skeptical about it, because you start peeling back the layers of who's funding these campaigns. Guys like Bill Gates who are buying up.
Bill Gates is not a vegan as far as I know.
No, he's not. So why is he pushing veganism?
I disagree that the mainstream media is pushing veganism. I think there's like a small vocal minority of people who are pushing it. And I think people are becoming more receptive to it. Although I disagree that it's about, I think you're trying to paint a picture of that this is sort of like economics. People are just funding this, and this is like there's like global funding. Right. I think if anything, it could be the other way around. I think that there are venture capitalists who say, oh, there's money to be made in this. There's now a market opening up. Let's make money off of it. I don't have a problem with that. I mean, I don't think you're anti-capitalist. I don't think you have a problem with people making money off of things. But I think the biggest push, I think the reason why it's become more popular and why people are talking about veganism and animal rights now is social media. I think it was a lot harder.
Else, right?
Yeah, I think it was a lot harder to talk about and to spread the message. Now you can have there are vegan activists who go into slaughterhouses and they capture footage on their cell phones and
Sure.
they put that online, and then the whole world sees that, and people, are horrified. And it's like, see, I'm not just saying this stuff. Like, here's actual evidence of it. I think that's what's really waking people up. It's not. I don't think it's necessarily. I think there's probably some opportunist type of people, and I say opportunist as though it's like a pejorative. I don't think it's necessarily a negative thing, because, like I said, I don't have a problem with people making money off of it. I've actually thought about like, that'd be kind of cool to start like a vegan milk, company or something like that. But
Sure.
I just don't see. I mean, you seem to be implying something sinister with that, or something like there's some other agenda behind it. But I've never. I don't think I've ever talked to a vegan who's like, oh yeah, I love Bill Gates. Like, this is why I'm vegan. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I don't necessarily have any problems with. Well, let me rephrase I do believe there is definitely a sinister agenda behind the push for veganism. I think a lot of people have gotten into veganism because of the propaganda campaigns for different reasons, like climate change and food shortages, and the other one that I brought up. What was it again? Climate change.
Well, I mean, I don't see what's the propaganda behind that, because I mean, commercial fishing, for example, is destroying our oceans, and there's no propaganda behind that. You can look at, independent organizations that are not pushing veganism. They're not funded. I mean, many of them are actually funded by commercial fishing and meat industry. So if anything, they're what they say can be biased the other way around. But
I think there's definitely, Patrick, there's definitely pollution that's happening by humans, but I think there's a really big push right now for climate emergency, and that's been pushed down from World Economic Forum, who's bent on actually they're the ones that are exploiting people at this particular junction in our history. So the World Economic Forum has all kinds of things that they're doing to gain more and more control over people and give more and more freedoms, take more and more freedoms away. And veganism is just one little small part of that.
Well, what freedoms are being taken away? If the world became vegan, what freedoms are being taken away from you?
Well, it's the freedoms in that it's what the World Economic Forum wants to do around social credit scores and ESG scores. So the ESG scores are going to be an app where it's environmental social governance scores, and those are going to rate what you can do, what you can buy, mortgages you can take out, how far you can drive, whether your carbon footprint is a certain distance. The smart cities, 15-minute cities, you probably heard of all those things. All those ESG scores are being pushed very, very hard from a very small group to have more and more control over humanity. And veganism is a small component of that because it contributes to the climate change narrative.
I'm sorry though, but I just think the amount of money that's in vegan, the vegan money making is just pale in comparison to meat, dairy, and eggs. I mean, there's no comparison. If you want to talk about moneyed interests, look at what the meat, dairy, and egg industries have done for decades. They influence the very, the nutrition pyramids and the tables and how they want to direct people to eat. They influence the commercials that we watch. We look at all this, we saw these commercials growing up, got milk, showing people, you have to drink milk every day in order to have strong bones.
Right.
You don't. There are plenty of plant sources for calcium. But they push this really hard and they influence. And you talk about social engineering, you talk about pressure. Yeah, I don't know. I'm skeptical of your skepticism. I think that this is like a big problem, or there's something sinister behind this. Because again, I mean, I think one of the things that you had mentioned before, I think when we were talking about this, is you talked about how you were skeptical when the world starts getting behind a social justice movement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm curious about that skepticism. I mean, would you have been skeptical when the world started to get behind abolition? I mean, yeah, there was a push for that. Was there money for that? I don't know. There's probably some moneyed interests who were in favor of that. Maybe they were in favor of, maybe there were capitalist interests who they wanted to, make money in a certain way. But at the end of the day, you can't let that muddy the message and deter people from what's really going on in terms of how we're treating animals, how we're actually relating to, these other beings that we share a planet with. They were not put on here to serve us, that we share a planet with them.
Again, yeah, and I don't disagree with your cause. I just want to make people aware that this is actually being pushed from people. And you don't know, you gotta do your research and understand, like, again, where it come from. These different companies that are coming up are so popular that vegans are buying into who have noble causes. You have real justification for wanting to save animals. But these other groups are trying to hijack your cause. So I'm just trying to make people aware that it's not just about the animals, it's about power and control over humanity. And as long as I can get that message out and let people know that through things like ESG scores, they are trying to control where you can go, what you can buy, how much money you can make, and what you can do in society. And now we can take that knowledge now and maybe not get around certain topics that vegans are promoting with the climate change narrative and the ideas that are coming down with some of these groups. But animal cruelty is definitely something I think we could focus on. But just raising awareness that there are other drivers for the vegan movement other than just trying to save animals.
Yeah. Can I ask, what would be your reason for, you seem to be in agreement in many ways with a lot of the stuff I'm saying. And it sounds like something that you've been thinking about. You said you haven't really thought about it for very long, but now that you've done a little bit of research and we've talked about it, what would be the reason, what would be stopping you from trying it?
Well, nothing would be stopping me from trying. I mean, from a self-discipline, I personally don't have any problems with doing these sort of things. I mean, I've been on long fasts and things like that. It's not really an issue. It's really a matter of, okay, I'm not convinced that these plant-based products and veganism is going to sustain me and I'm going to feel the way I should feel throughout the day. There's also the issue of, and I don't want to change the subject, but I'll continue to answer your question. So I have tried certain diets like that, and for me personally, I don't feel good on those diets. And it's and I would have to modify my lifestyle to in a drastic way, and obviously get into trying to understand this whole new world of products that I don't trust, because I think there's genetically modified manufacturing tactics that are used that could be more harmful for me than some of the meat-based products that I could be getting. I'm just being honest with you. And I'm not saying that that there's not genetically modified beef and meat and things like that. I mean, again, it goes back to the same cast of characters, but Bill Gates is trying to build the super cow to feed
I thought he was pushing veganism.
Exactly. It's all about money and control with him, but he's really pushing genetic manipulation is what he's pushing, whether he's doing it for plants or meat. But they want to get all the actual natural meat out of the system as well. So it's kind of a two-edged sword when it comes to the genetically modified things. And I get concerned about that, because that we start modifying what you're consuming in the ways that they can get to a human being's DNA. Now we're talking about changing species. Now we're getting to spiritual conversations of we're created in the image of God. Well, they're trying to change who we are.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have to go that far in changing species or anything. I mean, because the fact is, I mean, I don't know what your diet is, but I'm presuming a lot of the stuff that you eat already is vegan. I mean, you don't just eat meat, right? So you're eating, vegetables, and you're eating beans and rice and chips and all kinds of stuff. So, I mean, when it talks, nutrition is important when it comes to considering switching over to a vegan lifestyle. And by the way, nutrition is probably the biggest thing that affects us, because we eat every day, 3 times a day. But there's also other things too. I mean, it's what we wear, it's leather and wool and feathers. And we can talk about how those are affecting animals being subjugated. But the nutrition thing is definitely important. I agree with you. When I first became vegan, I said to myself, okay, I'm serious about this. I want this to be a permanent thing. I want it to be long-term. I want it to be sustainable. I don't want this to be just like a fad diet that I try out for a few weeks and then realize it doesn't work for me because it's not, because I didn't plan it out very well. And so I started to research a lot about nutrition. I tried to understand what are the important vitamins and nutrients. Some of the handouts that I brought in my table that anyone is welcome to take. It talks about some of those key nutrients that we need, calcium and iron and B12 and omega-3. I actually have for those who are sitting here, I have you've probably heard omega-3s, being very important to your diet, and you get those basically from fish. You can get it from plants as well, but the body's ability to convert ALA into EPA and DHA, the different forms of omega-3s basically, is not always the same for everyone. So the best thing, my advice, and this is not just my advice, but the advice of nutritionists, is basically take a multivitamin. That's the best way, whether you're vegan or not. I recommend that. I have here, this is a vegan omega-3 supplement that I take. It has your daily amount of EPA and DHA form of omega-3. It's not from fish oil, it's actually from algae, because the fish eat algae, and that is where the omega-3 is actually found, is in the algae. So the fish consume that, and then we eat the fish, and we get that as like a byproduct. So there are ways to get these nutrients. I mean, all nutrients ultimately come from plants. So it's important to do some of the research and start to figure out what is important. Like I said, iodine, B12. I would say protein, but I think protein kind of gets overly emphasized to the point where it's protein is not a vital nutrient, but believe me, there are plenty of plants in protein. So as long as you're eating a well-balanced diet, I mean, it sounds like with your health concerns, you don't want to eat like a lot of processed foods and everything. That's great. I mean, I try to primarily eat whole plant-based foods, meaning, I take rice and I take beans and I take some, broccoli and cauliflower, and I take, dark leafy greens, and try to get a nice mix of, rich different vegetables and fruits and nuts and natural fats,
you feel
avocado, and I feel great. Yeah. So I think that those are great. I mean, I made an entire Instagram page just of like of vegan meals. Where I tried to take some of my favorite things. I take like chili and pizza and enchiladas, and I just veganize them. In many cases, it's very easy. You switch out one or two things, and you got a vegan meal in your hand. But that's one of the ways that I actually try to spread awareness of it, because I think one of the you haven't really expressed concern just now, but one of the things that I think a lot of people are concerned about with becoming vegan is like, oh, I don't want to give all the taste. Like I don't want to eat rabbit food all day,
Right.
But there is so many vegan options out there and like delicious vegan foods that you're barely even going to know the difference.
No, I'm going to take a quick break and see, Luke, I'll check in with you. It's been a little while. What are people saying online?
We've got a lot of comments, not a whole lot of questions.
All right. Anything interesting worth sharing?
Human embryonic kidney, what's that? That was one of the questions.
Yeah, it's aborted fetal cells.
Okay.
Human embryo, HEK 2023, something like that. That's one of the ingredients that are in many of the processed foods to, again, stimulate your taste receptors.
I had a question. Just, what would your goal be, or the vegan community's goal? Say, I like to look 5 years out or 10 years out. Is killing and eating meat illegal at some point, and how's that controlled? What would be the long-term goal? And secondly, it's difficult.
I'm having trouble hearing you.
Okay, sorry about that. But what I was saying was, what is the long-term goal of the vegan community and you as a whole in the world? And at some point, would there be a desire to like no more eating meat? It would be illegal or controlled by?
Would it be a crime against?
Would it be a crime of some point? And then secondly, it's just very difficult. I think that's why it's hard. I mean, it's healthy, just like it's healthy to work out, but it's hard to work out on a regular basis. You make some, you make some crucial decisions in your grocery shop, and you've shared. So spreading that across the country is going to be tough, but you've shared also a lot of benefits that have opened my eyes, and I'm sure a lot of the viewers. But, where do you see is the goal to end meat eating for everyone?
Yeah, I'll just quickly address the second point first, and then I'll address your first point. So yeah, it's okay. It's not that hard, to be honest. I thought it was going to be difficult to switch over to a vegan diet. I did it overnight. Some people have a little more trouble with it. There's a transition period. Maybe they'll start to give up meat on a few days a week or whatever. There's a little bit of effort required in the beginning to understand some of the nutrition involved and just make sure you're getting like a balanced diet. But honestly, after like a few months, I didn't even notice it. Like it's so second nature to me that it's really not that hard. It's not like going to the gym. I don't think it's not, going to the gym actually takes like real willpower, but to not buy something that was once you know what's behind it, once you've seen the slaughterhouse footage and the amount of suffering that goes into these products, it's not something that you just forget. To me, it wasn't hard. Willpower was no issue.
So speaking of suffering, Patrick, I'm just curious, because you do hold an atheist worldview. So doesn't atheism hold to evolutionary theory and natural selection?
Can I also first just address because Luke also asked a question. Then I'll come back to your point. But so for the long-term goal, I mean, personally, my long-term goal is that the world is going to be vegan. I think it has to be. I say that because it's unsustainable what we're doing on the environmental reasons, but also because no injustice can live forever. We can't. These crimes cannot continue to take place. They once took place in the dark, and now that's starting to come to light. People are becoming aware of this, and it's not going to last forever. People will become vegan. I don't know if it will happen in my lifetime. Ultimately, I would want to see an end to animal agriculture. If it were up to me, I would ban animal agriculture. I would ban animal slavery, just as we banned human slavery back in 1865 in the United States, just as the UK banned it before that. That sounds like an extreme position. It's not. We're enslaving billions of animals every day. I can give you the numbers on how many animals are slaughtered just in the US. It's about 271 per second. It's 55 billion animals per year, mind-boggling numbers. So the extreme position is to allow this to continue, the injustice to continue. It's not extreme to say we're not going to allow this anymore as a society. We can't continue to treat our other beings with such callous and hold them with so little regard and with so little care. People say that they're against animal cruelty, and I believe them. I think both of you would agree, like, you're against animal cruelty. If you came across someone just like kicking a dog in the street, you would immediately, you would intervene. You would say that's wrong. And people, especially children, when they see animals being mistreated, they know that it's wrong. But so much of it happens behind the scenes to where we don't have to think about it. And we've also become desensitized and conditioned, societal norms, to where certain animals we regard as food and as commodities.
Mm-hmm.
Pigs we think of as bacon, and dogs and cats are our companions. I get that. Pigs are just as smart, probably smarter than dogs. If you interact with a pig, it's like a dog. It's got a personality. They are they're friendly. They love humans.
Well, until they're released to the wild, though, then become boars. Right? They become boars. They become very aggressive and can actually kill people.
But domesticated pigs, just as
even domesticated pigs, if they become feral animals out in the wild, you become boars.
Right, but I'm saying you can go to animal sanctuaries. You can go to Piedmont Animal Sanctuary in Pittsburgh, North Carolina, and you can look at animals there that have been rescued from the animal agriculture industry, and these animals are friendly. You can hug a turkey. I've hugged a blackberry on that refuge. I sponsor that animal on the refuge. Turkeys are some of the friendliest animals. You'd never expect that. You think that they're timid or that they would attack a person, but they don't. Not when they've been treated with kindness. Not when they've been rescued from slavery, and they recognize the people who rescued them, care about them. They show kindness.
I appreciate that. I want to. I think we can all grant that slaughterhouses are they're not good situations, right? Slaughterhouses are horrible. There is cruelty. There's been footage. I think the vegan community has done a really good job of exploiting animal cruelty in slaughterhouses. Now, my question would be then, I got a couple questions for you. One is going to be about the end game and how this finally looks, but the other is about, what do you think of hunters then? Because hunters go out with a bow, or they go out with a shotgun, and they take out a deer, and I don't know how much a deer feeds, but like an average steer, 1,200-pound steer can feed up to 2,300 people. And so a hunter can go out there and they could take out a deer. It's not humane because it's still death and it's still killing, but they're certainly not exploiting animals and pain and suffering. Yeah, the deer will bleed out a little bit for, 30 minutes or something like that. So you can call that suffering, but that person's now taking that meat, and they're not saying everybody's doing that. I know that's not the system, right? I'm talking about, like, if I wanted to make a change, is there a model, Patrick, where someone could eat meat like a hunter for their family, not for money, but they're living off the land? Because we might all have to do this pretty soon with these ESG scores. But well,
they could also grow plants on that land. They don't have.
I hope so.
They don't have to kill animals in order to survive.
Except for the seeds are probably genetically modified, but that's another point.
Yeah,
what do you think about the deer? What do you think about the deer?
This might surprise you, but I actually have less of an issue with hunters than I do with animal agriculture.
Okay.
I'm still against hunting. I think it's unnecessary, and many people do it for sport or just for fun, which is like okay. Even more. Would you say? Well, I think it's egregious. I think just to kill someone for fun. I think that's wrong. Okay. But no, you don't have to kill an animal. I agree with you in a way where it's like you're probably impacting the environment less, and you're causing in many ways less suffering, because at least you're killing one animal and you're feeding multiple people over a longer period of time. Like I almost think, like, from a practicality standpoint, if you come at this with some more of a like utilitarian mindset of like, well, how can I cause the least amount of suffering? I think that's probably better than sitting down at the Super Bowl and eating 25 chicken wings. I mean, chickens only have 2 wings, right? So every 2 wings you're eating, that's another chicken that had to die on your behalf. So
either way, it's still it's better. But regardless of the scenario, we're still in a position where it's inconvenient even to be a hunter, right? Like now you've got to go out and hunt and gather your own feed or your own food rather, and then clean them and do all that process, which is could be complicated, just as I would envision as an omnivore complication with vegan eating, because it's an inconvenience that we would have to grapple with as a society.
Yeah, and the one thing about hunting is that it's not sustainable. I mean, you can't feed a country, certainly not the United States, off of hunting. People are not going to go out and hunt. A few people could have the opportunity to do that, but you're not going to feed a country off of hunting. So to me, it's almost like it's a little bit of a moot point. You know, like, okay, maybe you have a few outliers, and as the world becomes vegan, and I think it will become vegan, I think people are going to transition. It's going to be gradual. It's not going to happen overnight. I think you will have more isolated cases where people are still practicing hunting, or they have small backyard farms, they have eggs and things like that. But the industry itself has been dismantled.
So does the model look like, I'm thinking of New Delhi, right? They got 40,000 cows or steers that are running around in their streets, sharing streets with humans, right? Because and there's a lot of people starving in New Delhi as well, but there's all kinds of cattle out there sharing because they're sacred for them. Is that what it looks like? Then we set them all free and they're everywhere? Or
No,
what does a free animal world look like?
No, yeah. You know what's really ironic about India is that they hold cows as sacred, but India is actually the largest exporter of beef. So they don't eat it themselves, but they export it to the rest of the world.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's very strange. But no, we're not having animals just roam around. Okay, so this is a point that I hear, that gets brought up sometimes. And I think it's a legitimate point. It's a legitimate concern. Like, what do we do with all these animals? Well, first of all, we stop breeding them into existence. And it's going to be a gradual transition. If we stopped today,
so it's a depopulation effort.
Okay. So 95% of all animal life on Earth is domesticated animals. Only 5% is wildlife.
Really?
That's shocking to hear. I had to look that up to verify that, but because we're talking 60, 70 billion land animals, not even fish. Fish, we're into the trillions, and things like shrimp, and then we're into the tens of trillions per year that are killed. But just land animals, chickens, cows, pigs, we're talking tens of billions that are bred into existence. And so, yes, you have these massive swaths of earth that we need to clear out forests. We need to chop down, the rainforests, and we need to clear all this environmental destruction in order for them to grow the animals and also grow the plants to feed the animals. So a sort of a long-term transition is we phase out of this. We stop breeding them bit by bit to where there's not tens of billions roaming around. And then the remaining ones, you can turn them over to shelters.
So do farmers start, what do they do with their farms then? Is it all plant? They transition over to a plant-based farm?
Some of them are doing that already. There's a beef farmer that I just heard about not too long ago I believe it was somewhere out in the Midwest, that they actually became, I don't know if it's vegetarian or vegan, but they said, we don't want to have anything to do with this anymore. We see what these, we just don't feel right about using these cows to make money and sending them to their deaths.
Yeah.
And they actually sold their farm. They said the remaining cows that they had on their farm, they turned to animal refuges. And they said, can you take these in basically as, animal refugees, basically. Some of them actually came here to North Carolina. Again, the Piedmont. I'm not associated with Piedmont, but I think they're a great organization out of Pittsburgh. They actually took some of those cows and basically adopted them and said, we're going to take care of them and let them live out their lives.
The plants are, to your point previously, aren't plants a problem too?
Problem in what way?
As far as growing the crops and the water sustainability, when you made the climate change argument, didn't you say plants were a problem?
Sure. It's impossible to cause zero suffering or to.
You see your bingo.
My bingo. Does everyone have a copy of the bingo card? These are, I don't know if
I'm seeing people write things down. I'm like, I know what they're, because I went to.
Has anyone gotten bingo yet?
That's hilarious.
Twice? The bingo card is meant to be, these are the common arguments I hear.
Did you give these to the meat eaters?
I give them to everybody.
Okay.
It's to follow along. See, these are the common arguments. I'm using arguments with quotation marks with my fingers because these are the things that vegans hear time and time again. These are the reasons why, like, we can't be vegan. And it's things like, but lions eat meat and, B12 though, and plants feel pain. And I think we're about to get on that topic as well. But
this is hilarious. No, I don't care about plants feeling pain. But,
okay. How dare you? No.
Well, let's talk. So you got lions on here. Let's go ahead and maybe I'll rig this event. But lions, okay, predators. What do you do with predators? And I want to talk maybe about speciesism a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But let me check in with Luke real quick. Luke, what do you got going on? What kind of questions do you have, man? You've been quiet. I'm sorry.
Nah. Yeah, man, this is good for me. I like to talk, so listening's great. To Nick, how would you feel about trying just the sides, meaning just the vegetable sides you already eat in your daily meals? just loading a little more, basically going vegan. How would you feel about that, Nick?
I'm willing to test drive veganism. At the caution again that there's a lot behind veganism. So you'd have to be incredibly careful for me to be able to support what I think is exploitation of the image bearers of God. Like I said before, exploitation of humans for some of the things I talked about before with the narratives behind some of these companies that are pushing veganism.
Yeah, can I address that just real quick?
Sure.
So you talk about, I think you mentioned the idea of we need to also care about humans. Basically, let's not neglect human welfare for animal welfare.
Well, not even also, I think it should take precedence.
Okay, well, yeah, we can talk about whether or not it takes precedence. Now, on an individual level, there's only so much that I can do as an individual.
Right.
I think human rights are extremely important as well as animal rights. In some ways, vegan activists, animal rights activists, I think will sometimes stress animal rights more, and there's some good reasons for that. So one of the reasons is that human rights violations, which happen every single day, and they're atrocious. You have real life human slavery that takes place today. You have people being mistreated all around the world, and we should speak out about those things, and we should do things. Now, one of the things that makes the animals crisis in some ways more pressing, you could argue, is that if you go out onto the street and you interview 100 people, how many of those people are going to try to rationalize or justify human slavery? Probably none of them.
Sure.
But if you talk about animal agriculture and you talk about should we be killing animals for food, you're going to get a very mixed response. You might have one or two vegans in there, or people who are, we shouldn't be cruel to animals, but I'm kind of okay with.
Do you think that's a programmed thing in society, or do you think that's
I think it's a societal norm. Yeah, I think we're just so used to it that it's hard to get people to care about animals, certain kinds of animals, I should say. I should caveat this. It's hard to get people to care about chickens. I mean, this is something I've had people tell me directly. They say, "Oh, well, chickens, they're just stupid animals. They just walk around, peck the ground. They don't feel pain." No, they do feel pain. Yeah. And just because you don't personally care about those animals or those individuals doesn't mean that they're not suffering. It doesn't mean that they don't matter. Just because you don't find them, people like dogs and cats because dogs and cats are cute. But we don't really care about pigs because pigs are ugly and pigs taste good. So, but
dogs got personality. That's a quote from a movie.
Yeah.
Personality goes a long way.
Yeah, I have 2 Chihuahuas and they have a ton of personality.
On the chickens though, okay, so we would like to get chickens as a family, a chicken coop, and have chickens roaming around our yard. That's something I actually desire because I like eggs. So what's the deal with eggs? Are we exploiting chickens because of their eggs? If they're just on our house, our own property?
So that depends though. Yeah, if they're laying eggs in your backyard, and you just happen to be picking up extra eggs laying around, I don't necessarily have an issue with that. I'm not going to be going around. I'm not going to be going to your door and knocking on your door and saying, "Hey, you need to stop doing that." But again, when we talk about the commercialized production of eggs in industries, you realize that baby male chicks are thrown into meat grinders while they're still alive because they don't lay eggs, and they're financially they're of no value to these companies. They say, we're not even going to bother with it. We're going to hatch these eggs. The females go into this lane, and the other lane, the males go into that lane. Yeah. You can look at videos of this. They fall into a meat grinder. I don't know how long it takes for them to die. I don't know how long they're suffering in these meat grinders, but they're thrown into these things alive. These industries do not give a shit about animals. They don't care about how much they're suffering. They're there to make money, and that's why these industries need to end.
So let me ask this question then, just from your vantage point. Does the issue of animal suffering take precedence over the issue of human suffering?
Excuse me. No, I don't think it necessarily needs to take precedence. I think that again, I can only control what I do, and I can only influence so many people. So, what could I do personally to take a human rights, cause human slavery? That that happens around the world, right? That's happening right now.
I'm glad you're recognizing it, because a lot of people don't.
What could I personally do to end that? Well, there's maybe some things that I could try to be careful about certain products that I buy. It's hard to buy a cell phone that hasn't been manufactured under certain conditions. But
electric vehicles are another one of those, though. What do you think
vehicles. Much of the first world, we rely on basically the exploitation of the third world. It's an unnecessary, unfortunate fact. And there's only so much that I can do as an individual to really affect that.
Right.
But can I directly have an impact on the lives of animals? Can I make a conscious decision today, right now, when I go out to eat at lunch? Can I choose something else on the menu and have a real impact? Everyone, I believe everyone at least likes to think of themselves as a compassionate person. No one likes, no one is in favor of cruelty or exploitation. No one believes that. But And I think some people want to make a difference, and it can be very frustrating and very, it's easy. It's like, I just want to tune this all out because it's too depressing to think about. You watch the news. I don't really watch the news, partly for that reason. And it's very frustrating. It's like, how can I make a difference? How can I, as an individual, actually make a difference? Well, you can put a bumper sticker on your car, and you can say coexist, and you can say, peace on earth, and whatever. And those are fine. And I'm not saying don't do that, but let's be honest. Those are basically symbolic gestures. How much of a difference are you really making? But when you're a vegan, when you decide that you're going to stop funding these industries that are exploiting real animals right now, you're having a direct impact, and you really are making a difference. And that's a very encouraging thing. I don't really watch a whole lot of the slaughterhouse footage and the document. I've seen them all. It's honestly, when I watched Earthlings, it took me like 3 sittings to get through it because it was just, I felt sick watching it. Yeah. But at some point I was like, okay, I don't really need to keep watching this because I'm already convinced. And what difference is this really making? Maybe I can tell other people about the film, but I don't need to be convinced. And this is not really having any real difference in the world. But you can make a real difference by, it's basically just a boycott. It's a mass boycott, and it's making a difference.
We're talking about pain, right? Suffering is pain. Why is that important? Just trying to understand, why is it important for species not experience pain?
Yeah, is it cruel to kick a rock? I mean, rocks don't feel pain. So right. The sentience, whether or not an individual can suffer, that's really the metric that we use, whether or not cruelty is involved. If I kick a rock, or if I kick a head of broccoli, or if I kick a chicken, you tell me which one of those is cruel. And animals, this is actually a good segue into, are you familiar with the Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness? This is something that came out a few years ago. Yeah. So basically, if anyone else in the crowd is not aware of it, basically this was a team of neuroscientists, neuropharmacologists got together, and they said, let's look at all the latest research, and let's try to, what does the latest scientific knowledge say about consciousness? Are human beings the only beings in the world that are conscious? And the overwhelming the conclusion they came to was that no, like, human beings are not the only ones that are conscious. I'll read an excerpt. I actually have this. This is another handout on my table. You can read this. It's only 2 pages long, but I'll just read the end of it. It says, consequently, the weight of evidence indicates that humans are not unique in possessing the neurological substrates that generate consciousness. Non-human animals, including all mammals and birds and many other creatures, including octopuses, also possess these neurological substrates. So basically, other animals, they are conscious, they are sentient, they can feel pain and suffering, they can feel complex emotions like loneliness and fear and excitement. I mean, when I get home and my 2 dogs greet me at the door and they're spinning around in circles and they're jumping up and down, you tell me those animals are not feeling emotions. They're feeling excitement. They recognize people. They recognize faces. Chickens have language. This has been observed, and chickens actually have some rudimentary language. They have as many, I think it's like 30 words in the vocabulary. It's not a lot, but they're able to basically communicate with each other. Turkeys, I believe, actually can recognize each other, not by sight, but by their voices. They can recognize individuals, and they're very social animals. And that's probably part of the reason why they're gobbling all the time, is that they're just kind of like talking to each other, and they can tell each other apart. But I think, suffering, the suffering is really what it all comes down to, because if no one is suffering, if there's not a subject that is experiencing, what is happening, then it's kind of like, then it doesn't matter. That's why it's not cruel to kick a rock, but it's cruel to kick an animal, or cruel to kick a human.
Yeah, I can relate to the wanting to eliminate suffering of animals from a Christian worldview, Patrick, but how does your atheist worldview inform the morality around suffering?
Well, a lot of atheists are humanists. A lot of them identify as humanists, and so they basically build their worldview and their morality on the sense of well-being and wanting to promote well-being. Typically, this is focused on human beings. It's very human-centric, and I think it's actually very speciesist. It's just, again, we've all been conditioned. We're all speciesist because we all grew up in this society where it's just normal. But atheists, many atheists get that, and I'd say I get that. That my basic morality is from a sense of well-being. I want to promote well-being. I don't want to cause harm to others, and I want to try to live in such a way where I'm promoting, the well-being of others, where I'm treating others with kindness and with respect. When I first learned about the arguments for veganism, and I told you before, 3 years ago, I probably would have just like kind of joked about it and like, oh, that's stupid, because I didn't take it seriously. But once I was confronted with the reality of what animals go through, and someone pointed out to me, they can feel pain too. They sense fear. It's undeniable. You can look in the face of an animal, and you know what it looks like when an animal is scared.
Yeah, you don't like it. I mean,
Yeah.
I understand that. Like from an atheistic materialistic perspective, though, we're from evolutionary theory, and we're all just stardust banging around and dancing to our own DNA and all that kind of stuff. But that comes from something, though, right? Is that just how inherently is it learned? Then is learned from society that's wrong?
Well, I think empathy is hardwired into our DNA. I think we're a social species. I think we survived, at least in partly because of our empathy. If it weren't for empathy, we would never survive as a species, because we need to care about each other. Survival of the fittest is something that it's kind of it's been sort of perverted in a way where it's like, yes, you're describing what happens in nature, but just because something happens in nature, just because it's natural for, to be like, to care about, to be selfish, basically, it doesn't mean that it's good. And I mean, why do I care personally? Well, because I have empathy. I know what it's like to suffer, and I don't like to see others suffer. And I think that's pretty much inherent in all human beings. And I think that can be informed by your religious worldview. I think that, and again, that's why I say there is no conflict between veganism and Christianity, or between veganism, animal rights, and following Jesus, because he preached loving your neighbor as yourself. One day, if you're a Bible believer, you believe most likely that you're going to stand before God on the day of judgment and give account of your life. And what if you were to stand there? Imagine if you were to stand there after a lifetime of whatever you're living out your life, and then God asks you, why did you mistreat the least of these? Why did you mistreat my creation? Why did you not show compassion towards those who had no power to defend themselves, and you turned a blind eye and you were part of the problem? I mean, imagine how that would feel if you were to get to the end of your life and realize that you lived in such a way where you were not respecting God's creation. You weren't showing the kind of stewardship and care that he expects of you. Might does not make right. Just because you have the power to do something does not mean that it's right to do that thing.
I think that there's something to be said for the exploitation of animals, I think, with the slaughterhouses and the things that we've been talking about already. But just the simple, back in Jesus's day, obviously, that Jesus did eat fish, right? So we stand before God on Judgment Day. He's going to exponentially be more concerned about my rejection of his son who died to save me from my sins than he would the exploitation of animals. So I think it's a worldview that would inform it. And I think you are, Patrick, you are created in the image of God, and that's why you have these empathies for animals, and you don't want to see cruelty. And I get all that, but and I think that there should be something. All right, I think that we, as a society, and I've learned something. Like I said, I came here to learn something. I think we can make decisions and figure out who the worst offenders are. But I do think I'm still not convinced that 100% vegan diet would suit me. Not necessarily because of I think there'd be a way to eat meat that wouldn't exploit animals. I mean, there's going to be death and suffering, but everybody dies and everybody suffers at some point. I think that it probably is a model where it's a hunting type of gathering sort of scenario. Or like I said earlier, having chicken coops and things like that. We wouldn't kill our chickens, but we definitely eat their eggs and things like that. But all right, but you've got my wheels turning about at least being conscious over what's going on in society in these slaughterhouses, and I do appreciate that.
Absolutely, yeah. I admire your care for the animals. I have a hard time. You use animals and humans kind of in the same. You said someone several times when you were talking about someone is brought to the.
They are someone. They're not an object.
Okay, and yeah, I'm listening and I'm taking it in. But these scriptures, these that you're sharing also tell me that you have some belief because you're so knowledgeable in the Bible, which is encouraging for me. And then, it's I'm learning.
Yeah. Well, humans are animals. I mean, we say humans and animals, but really it's the difference between non-human animals and human animals, because we are animals. We are one species amongst many. We share this planet with other animals, And we're not really as different as we like to think we are. This is the power of speciesism and human supremacy that has just shaped our worldview, where we look at us as being on the top and all these other animals as being on the bottom.
Well, not just we. I mean, God looks at us that way.
And we look at it from what we're doing. You said the least of these. Well, I think about I do a ton for the homeless or in the community. I do a lot. I don't do a lot for the animals. But I think we all look from in the mirror, that what we're good at. We look at what we're good at, and then, but yeah, and we have a similar thing because I want everybody to know and believe in Jesus Christ and have a relationship with them, because I think when they do that, they'll also lose a lot of suffering.
Actually, that's a good point. I think a relationship with Jesus Christ would actually incentivize us. If like these slaughterhouse owners actually did find Jesus, then they would realize the errors in their ways and they would stop exploiting animals, because that consciously they'd go towards righteousness and not deception and not immorality.
I would hope so. The thing that I would worry about with that is I think they would take some of the other passages of the Bible, like especially when you talk about like animal sacrifices in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. I would worry that some people are able to take certain passages and sort of rationalize it and say, well, this is okay because God gave me dominion. So
that's an argument in itself.
That's one thing about any religious scripture, and part of the reason why I'm not really religious myself is that you can kind of read into it whatever you want. I mean, to be honest, there are, again, to use the example and of the abolitionists back in the day, there were people who held up Bible verses and they say, see, slavery is part of God's plan.
Yeah, and so did Hitler. I mean, man can pervert anything that God did.
There are people who argue, one way or the other, they focus on certain verses. So that's why, in a way, it's like I don't use the religious argument. I don't say because I'm not a Christian myself, so it wouldn't make sense for me to do this. But my main point, I think, is just that you can get to a place of where you care about animals and you care about animal rights violations,
right?
From a biblical worldview. That's not how I got there, and I think that there are some. Gary Yourofsky was one of the greatest animal rights activists who's ever lived. I think he was Jewish. I think some of his religious views probably influenced how he viewed himself and humans and our place in the world with animals. Yeah. So you can be religious and
I can tell you, man, if you want your veganism to spread, you give your life to Jesus Christ. I'm telling you, I've seen my business, I've desired kids and faced infertility and seen pregnancy happen out of nowhere when the doctor said that cannot happen. So if you want veganism to spread, I'm telling you, if you give Jesus Christ your life to Jesus, I'm telling you, he will do things that will blow your mind. And we could talk scripture all day and how it's twisted, but I'm telling you, a personal relationship with Jesus and prayer, the power of prayer that I've seen in my life. I mean, I've been made a millionaire through the power of prayer in my relationship with Jesus Christ. So I'm telling you, he could help you with this cause. I love your noble heart in it, and I'm learning here.
And I want to say something else about that. So, yeah, if man is twisting scripture for his own gain, right? Going to Leviticus, by the way, is the old covenant, right? That there's the old covenant, and then it was for a foreshadowing of Jesus coming. So now a person genuinely repents for their sins. That's a new creation. You become a new creation. The old has passed away, the new is here. So if you're still exploiting and using scripture to twist your agenda, then you're not a follower. You're not a born again believer. That's just how that works. You haven't been new created, because you would run from the sin. You'd run from the exploitation if you were actually a genuine follower of Christ. So that's the way I'm looking at it. That if these slaughterhouse owners did get born again, they're seeing the cruelty in the end and the suffering in the animals. I am again. I hold to the contention that I believe that we are biblically allowed to consume animals as food. However, the cruelty piece and the things that are done behind the scenes and the footage that your groups are seeing and filming and exploiting, that's got to go away if you have true born again believers.
But how does that go away if we don't stop eating the animals? I mean, how do we have? I mean, you said yourself, there's nothing humane that happens in a slaughterhouse. How do we have animal agriculture and make this compatible with what you're talking about? I think ethically, I think both of you seem to be in agreement with what I'm saying. Sort of like ethically, like we're in word, we're in agreement. But I think there's a disconnect between the ethics and behavior. And behaviorally, if you don't make changes, we can talk about ethics all you want. We can talk about how I care about animals.
Hypocritical.
But it's
hypocrites. It's
at the end
just
of the
like
day.
Christians who talk about loving the Lord, but then they don't love their neighbor.
Yeah, I mean, every day I see people drive along the road and geese are crossing the road and people stop and they let the geese people don't want to be cruel to animals.
No,
when
no.
people actually see it firsthand,
Yeah.
they understand it's not good. When you see people hear about stories where a dog was locked in a car in a hot day, people go and they break the windshield and they let the car out. That's destruction of
It's because
property.
it's seen,
you're
right?
breaking
It's
the
not hidden.
law.
It's not hidden, right?
Yeah, some people are breaking the law. They're we talked about how vegan activists can be a bit extreme. Like, well, that's an example of someone breaking the law, breaking personal property. But we don't say that was a bad person. They were saving an animal in that in that instance.
I got you.
And but you know what other animals are put on hot cars every single day and are transported? All the animals that you're eating every day. These pigs and chickens and cows, they're put onto these big trucks. They are shipped across the country to slaughterhouses. They go through all the elements. They are deprived of food and water for about 24 hours prior to that because it's like, hey, they're about to be killed anyway. Who cares? Okay. They're in the rain. They're in the snow. They're in the heat. Many of them die on the journey over. Again, it's reminiscent of like slave ships, and it's horrible. The ones who are still alive are dragged off these trucks. They're hung upside down. They're bolted in the head. Many of these pigs are put into gas chambers, literal gas chambers. We have gas chambers in America today where we are putting pigs to death in gas chambers. We're slitting their throats, and it's just pure horror. It's pure. Yeah. There's no way to do this in a way that's humane. Not if they want to keep making money. Companies are going to do this in the way that makes the most money and is the most efficient. We can try to put laws in place to try to advance animal welfare. We can try to make it so you have to treat them a little bit more humanely. Don't kick them. Don't rip their teeth out. Don't do the things that are just normal industry practices. Chickens have their beaks cut off because otherwise they'll peck each other. We can do things, small changes, but ultimately all you're really doing with these small animal welfare steps to make it a little bit more tolerable for the animals, you're making slaves that are treated a little bit better. I don't want slaves that are treated better. I want to end slavery. I want animal liberation. I don't want these animals to have to go through this anymore because they don't deserve it.
I appreciate that, Patrick. We got we could probably go a little over, but I'd like to open it up to questions from everybody. We've got a nice audience here. Really appreciate everybody joining. We got a wireless mic here, so my friend Wayne is going to come around and see what's going on. Oh, you got to turn it on. Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe I don't have it on. Let me now try. My fault.
Should I make the assumptions that all vegans are against abortions?
I don't know. That's not really something I really think about or talk about. It's not really part of the vegan, the vegan message.
Good point.
I'm sure you have pro-life and pro-choice vegans.
No, I don't want to argue, but do you put humans above animals?
It depends on what you mean by that. I mean, I try to live in such a way where I don't want to cause harm to anyone. I don't like to think of it. It's not a hierarchy of whether or not humans are superior to animals or if they're
don't use the term superior. Above.
Well, okay. What do you mean by above, though? In what sense? Are they more intelligent? Like what makes them better? What makes them above?
What makes them equal?
Our shared experiences. We both have consciousness. We have two eyes. We have a nose. We have digestive system. We have fingers and toes. We have bodies. We have subjective experiences. We share so many similarities. The sort of the external differences.
I get it. I don't want to take up too much time. Next question is, are you aware that we're eating babies?
I think Nick talked about that in the...
Are you aware that we're eating babies? Are you aware that we're drinking blood of humans? Do we know where those human beings are being put? Like, I wasn't really, like he talked about the Coke, but are you aware that we're eating babies and we're using babies as human sacrifices?
Well, I know that we're eating babies when we eat 47-day-old chickens. I mean, these have not, been able to live out their whole lives.
I'm referring to
human babies.
I'm referring to human babies, and I put human babies above all animals.
Well, you can do that. You can put them above. I'm not asking you to put animals above humans or even equal with humans. I'm saying put the value of an animal's life above that of a sandwich. Because the choice is not save animals or save humans. Save everyone. Save them all. I am in favor of many other social causes. Veganism is not the only thing I care about. It's the thing that's probably most central for me, but there are other things that I care about in the world. I care about human suffering. But at the end of the day, we're talking about, do we kill this animal for a sandwich? Or that's not the right way to phrase it. The choice is between, a sandwich and the life of another innocent being.
So, Patrick, you do care about the suffering of the unborn then in the womb?
Yes.
Okay. So, go ahead.
I had a question about the religious component to
Sure.
this. And maybe my perspective, but it seems like it's God either punishes you or rewards you. And it seems like people live their life through the fear of the supernatural result. So I was wondering if using fear to promote veganism is really, take care of the animals or else is a valid way to inspire people to do the right thing.
I mean, I don't think I ever said take care of the animals or else. There's no threat under anything I'm saying. I'm trying to raise awareness and I'm trying to appeal to your compassion and to your humanity and say, we shouldn't do this anymore. But I don't have any real power. I can't influence you. You make your own decisions. All I can do is talk about it and
you did
encourage
speak about Judgment Day and possibly having to.
Yeah,
so
I think follow up. Can you do a follow up real quick?
Is that were you talking about with judgment as far as with God judging you?
God judging, using God as the tool to judge people's behavior, basically his fear of I will send you to hell.
With respect to accepting veganism or not?
The animal suffering, using don't kill animals because God will send you to hell.
Yeah, but to be clear, I don't actually believe in that. I'm not religious. I'm an atheist. But I'm saying that from a biblical worldview, if you believe that you're going to give account of your life to God, as many Bible-believing Christians do, then I'm saying also take this into consideration. That what if He were to ask you, how did you treat my creation? How did you treat the least of these, those who were powerless to defend themselves? How did you treat them? I'm not saying I think that's going to happen. I don't actually believe in it. I'm just saying that, but from that worldview, if you believe that you're going to be judged by God, then I think that's something else to take into consideration. So I'm not using fear of God to try to.
And Patrick, you're going to be judged by God because you haven't accepted His Son, but Christians aren't going to be asked those questions. We're going to get rewarded for the things that we did for the least of these, but we're not going to be held in front of accountable for God because Jesus washes all of our sins free. That doesn't mean that we don't have we have to obey His commands. So we still need to walk this out, but we're walking this thing out because we want to please our Father. We're not walking it out as a fear tactic to not go to hell because we've already been covered by the blood of Jesus. So just to be clear.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean you can do whatever you want. I mean, you agree with that, right? Just because you've been forgiven. Yeah, so you still have to live in such a way that's in,
And people that are just doing whatever they want and thinking that, I've said a prayer, then they're not really born again. That's what I'm talking about with the justifications of twisting Scripture and the slaughterhouse owners that aren't true believers. Yeah, they're not true believers. They're gonna be asked those questions. But someone who's really given their life to Christ and become a new creation, then they're not going to be asked those questions.
And Patrick never used hell in his argument about that. He was just saying when we stand before the Father, He is gonna, as Christians, we're gonna get an account for our life and what we did with the gifts He's given us.
Yeah, that's right.
Nick, I had a question for you. So after as the podcast episode comes to an end and all that you've listened to here today from Patrick, like all sides, what do you think leaving here today, your view has changed, if at all, if you are going to come out of this thinking about eating meat differently, eating dairy differently, if you're going to change that, how you can walk away from this conversation knowing more about it and still feel like ethically, still feel ethical for the decisions you make in your food?
I really appreciate that question. It's a good question. I think I can step away from this conversation being much more conscious of where these sort of meat products are coming from. I think that's something that we could all probably take away from and say, let's just be more conscious where these are coming from. Now, the issue is, as in human nature, that we're going to typically lean towards what's convenient. So now we got we're more conscious, but now say I wanted to make a change and eat more humane meat. Now I've got to do research and figure out what I've got to do that, or from a farmer that now we're not taking notwithstanding just not eating meat at all. I'm saying if I wanted to make a meat decision, now I've got to do some research and figure out where is the best ethically, where farmers are not exploiting these animals. How do I get that and make an effort to do that? That takes work and effort. So as a human, I'm gonna be more conscious. I'm gonna see what I can do, but am I gonna commit to actually taking the actions and walking this thing out? I can't honestly tell you with a straight face that I'm gonna do that. Now I'm going to get together with my family and we'll talk about it and we'll figure out what really is the best decision, because honestly, we don't want to eat, if animals are being slaughtered the way that they're slaughtered, they're probably pumping them full of all kinds of hormones and things like that I don't want to put in my body anyway, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's, for me, that's as a takeaway, and I appreciate the question.
Yeah, I was just gonna follow up. Like Patrick has said this to me before, you can't make anyone be vegan. I would just ask that you do the research, you think critically about it yourself, right, and walk away from it knowledgeable and make that decision, as opposed to just being uninformed and naive about the subject. Absolutely. And knowing the products that you're buying and where it's coming from.
That's good. That's good.
And I just have to harp on this one more time, because when I hear people talk about humane meat and free range and organic, grass-fed, all this stuff, these are largely propaganda marketing terms. They don't really mean a whole lot.
I got you, but here, Patrick, I've been, where was I driving? I was driving to Roanoke, Virginia, and I passed by, I was on I can't remember what road it was, but I saw a farm. I literally saw, it was something beef or cattle or whatever it was, and I saw cattle out in sort of the pasture. There's probably like 100 of them, and they're all out there doing their thing, and it was a farm for beef. Like, there's certain organizations like that are set up to, they're going to kill the cattle, but they're not, I don't see any slaughterhouse machines and hooks that are putting them through conveyors and things like that. It's just they're however they're killing them. Death is death, right?
Right.
But they're out there. They seem like they're living good lives. I don't know how long they're living, but that's the sort of alternatives that I'm seeing that could potentially, for me, be an option.
Right. I mean, there's grass-fed beef. Now, grass-fed beef is differently than free-range chickens, because you talk about free-range chicken, you're picturing like green pastures and
all they gotta have to do is open door.
It's a giant warehouse packed with tens or hundreds of thousands of chickens. They have like a 1 by 1 foot square area where they're actually allowed to have room enough.
It's a marketing campaign.
It really is. Yeah, pigs are typically put into cages that are around 2 foot by 6 foot, 2 feet wide, 6 foot long. It's not even big enough for them to turn around. And then they spend their entire lives in that cage.
Right. But I would, just from the perspective of doing your research and being aware, I'm going to harp on what I was harping on before. We do have a very small group of people out there that are promoting certain campaigns and initiatives that do your research into things like Beyond Meat, Impossible Foods. Figure out what they're doing to produce this food, and it will horrify you when you start diving into the details with these things. Again, we've talked about human embryonic kidney already, but the way that these things are manufactured, the people that are funding them, like guys like Bill Gates, who, by the way, is I'm not sure if you guys know this, when it comes to farmland overall, I have some statistics here, I got to find them. Mr. Gates, and there's a bunch of these guys, Klaus Schwab and the Morgans, and obviously everybody knows about the Rock.
I bet you don't use only Apple, don't you? You don't like Windows computers, I'm assuming.
Well, I like, I had to adapt to the Mac thing, but real quick. So Bill Gates is the largest private farmland owner in the U.S. 2018, he purchased 14,500 acres of prime eastern Washington farmland for $171 million. So in total, Gates owns approximately 242,000 acres of farmland with assets totaling more than $690 million. So to put that in perspective, that's nearly the size of Hong Kong. So when Gates was pressed about why he's gobbling up so much farmland in the U.S., he says, "Oh, it's not connected to climate change." The decision, he said, came from his investment group, Cascade Investment, the firm making these acquisitions, and those are the ones that are controlled by Gates. And the firm said it's, quote, very supportive of sustainable farming. It is also a shareholder in the plant-based protein companies Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods, as well as farming equipment manufacturer John Deere. And I don't know all the ins and outs of John Deere, but I do know that Bill Gates is a depopulation enthusiast.
I mean, he's rich and he wants to make money. I think he sees an investment that has a long-term potential. I think he's seeing a new market emerge, and he wants to. I mean, I don't know. You can look into that.
I hope so, but
something more sinister. But I just look at that as capitalism at work.
Yeah, no, I think there's much more to it, and I wish it was just like that. He was just trying to make money. That'd be amazing. But I do believe that, and I could play some clips for you. Actually, maybe I'll play a couple clips for you at the end, just as a bonus, because it's not really related to what we're talking about, of Bill Gates' agenda to depopulate the earth. Him and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have actually taken drastic measures, obviously through reproductive health, through his work in Africa with vaccines and those sort of things. He is literally trying to depopulate the earth. So my hyper skepticism evolves. I know you're skeptical about my skepticism. My hyper skepticism comes in when Bill Gates is involved with anything, because I know he's trying to genetically alter organisms, because he ultimately believes that we have too many people on this earth, and he wants to depopulate the earth. So how is he going to do that? This is one of the avenues through the genetically altered, meat and things like that are bringing this to fruition. It's a sad. But anyway, it's a travesty. But I could play at the end of this thing. I'll just play some videos from Gates, or maybe a quick 30-second, 40-second clip of him if you guys are interested.
Nice.
All right. This is more of like a comment than a question for the mediators, but if you are looking at things from a human rights perspective, there are actual human beings that have to work in these slaughterhouses, making a living, either forcibly impregnating animals, dismembering them, slashing their throats, etc. That takes a psychological toll on people. The other thing that I suggest everyone look into who's interested in the human rights side of things is the racism inherent in the pork and poultry industries in North Carolina. We are spewing literal fecal matter on some of the poorest Black, Latino, and Indigenous people in North Carolina as one of the world's largest pork and poultry producers.
How do you know, or what is the method for that?
Because there's nothing natural about the way we are warehousing and raising these animals for food, their poop has to go somewhere, and so they just spray it on people.
Oh, you're saying that
runoff from in the rivers and things. It pollutes the rivers and the waters, and
these lagoons, as they call these cesspools, overflow and spew into the surrounding communities every time there's a hurricane in North Carolina.
Appreciate the comment. Thank you. All right. Does anybody else have a comment before we start wrapping up? Closing words?
Hey, Patrick, I just wanted to confirm you are pro-life. She had asked.
I don't want to get into that topic. That's not what I don't really think about that topic. It's not something I'm.
Oh man, that topic's way. If you're protecting the life of animals, you most certainly want to protect the life of the human life.
We said he cares about the suffering of the unborn, so that seems like a pro-life statement.
Yeah,
I think it's complicated. Not really something I'm. Yeah,
I get it. I see
the Admiral Akbar meme. It's a trap.
Well, this whole interview, Patrick, I didn't know what I was going to do. I thought, Patrick, he's going to put me into a trap here, but I'm glad it's been really informative. I appreciate that. But no, we're not trying to trap you. But seriously, that's in our, like Vanessa was saying here, and when it comes to image bearers of God, the unborn is precedence.
How did you come up with statistics about Black and Hispanics? About what are you saying?
So where all the hog farms are is where you can draw a map of where the slaves settled after they were freed, and where all the CAFOs are around North Carolina. It is the exact same map as where they are all in the highest population concentrations of like rural Black communities in North Carolina. You can look into the North Carolina hog farm bills and the protests that have been going on around them. You don't see hardly any white people.
All right. Looks like we got time for one more question. We are a little bit over here, but thanks everybody. It's been great.
I'm just curious where all of y'all stand about genetically modified anything.
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I'm against it, but that wasn't obvious. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to say that I'm totally against any genetically modified. And it depends on what you mean by that. I mean, basically all fruits and vegetables you buy at the store are genetically modified, have been gone through, selective breeding and things like that. I mean, bananas, if you look at the way bananas looked in the wild before, we grow them and you buy them on the shelf, they did not used to look like that. They were like 2 inches long and they were green and kind of nasty looking. So I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with modifying and selective breeding things, breeding plants. If you want to talk about, I don't know, getting into some of the weird, playing God with stuff, it just depends. And I'm not a genetics expert, so I couldn't really say many intelligent things on this topic, but I'm not against it.
Human genetic engineering. There's actually an episode on human genetic engineering. If you want to go to Miracles and Atheists, and you can just type in human genetic engineering. I had some interesting discussions about that.
I'm mainly talking about when companies genetically modify grains so that they cannot be reseeded, repopulated.
Yeah, like patents on seeds.
Yes,
I think that's a problem. I mean, I think that's just I think that's a problem when large corporations own that much power, where like you can't even buy seeds to, like, if you want to have your own garden in your backyard,
It's
you have
a
to
siege,
buy it
right,
from,
Patrick? I mean, it's a manufactured food shortage.
Right. Yeah. It's Monsanto shouldn't have that much power and money where like you have to buy it directly from that one company just to grow your own food. Like, I think that's a problem. I agree.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and click the outro music here and say some closing words. But if I can get it to work here, here we go. Oh, that's nice. That's a nice beat. Patrick, thank you again. Thank you, Miracles Atheist community, and everybody's out here at the Wash House for listening to this presentation of the Miracles Atheist podcast. Thanks to Patrick Walsh, the Luke here, who owns the Wash House Laundromat. Appreciate all the hospitality. My biggest takeaway, I think, was what we're talking about here is that there is a lot of animal cruelty going on. There's things that we can do. We can make different decisions. And I think consciously I'm going to go home and I am going to look at these things differently. But I think I would really appreciate it if everybody would kind of look into some of the things behind what's being pushed in the media, right? So like the Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods are evil organizations. If you look into it, you'll come to that same conclusion. So just check it out and try to figure out how to be a vegan in a way that's not going to exploit human beings through genetic engineering and other means and try to control. I think ESG scores are a really big deal. And I think the ESG scores are those things are borrowing from veganism to try to push that agenda. So I'd like you guys to look into that as well. And other than that, I really do appreciate the dialogue and a topic that I've never really even thought all that much about. If you found value in this episode, you can always go give us a rating on Apple or an honest review. And remember, we are making a movie. So I'd love to take guys like Patrick on the streets. Let's go out and figure out where people are claiming that there's miracles, and let's go out there together and have a very objective perspective of what's happening. Would that be, from an atheist, I think there's 2 vegan atheists here, right? Like, would that be interesting for you if there's somebody claiming to do supernatural things, like go out there and see what's happening? Would you guys be interested in doing that?
That would see, like, go and see the miracles?
Yeah.
Sure. If there's a miracle happening, I'll go witness it.
Right. So I get that response a lot from atheists. So that's the kind of the concept is let's go look at this thing objectively. We'll paint a picture of your experiences versus the Christian's experiences. And kind of see what happens. So again, if you want to help us out and support that movie, there's a QR code there, but you go to patreon.com/miracles and atheists. There's going to be a lot more coming out in the upcoming podcasts. And, I've got to, in good conscience, when I have a captive audience, encourage you to consider making Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Messiah, your Lord and Savior. He lived the life you should have lived. He died the death you should have died. 3 years later, he rose from the dead, proving he's the Son of God to save you from your sin nature, not just from your sins, but from your sin nature, something not really emphasized in the church. He will supernaturally transform you to a new creation when you trust him with your whole life. The old you will pass away, and the new you will be here. So, got any questions about that? I'd love for you to come by and ask me. If you need prayer, there was prayer for any chronic health conditions. We'll see some miracles right now. I'd love to do that. And thank you again, everybody. I really appreciate it. It's been awesome.
Thanks, guys.
it's funny. I was telling her in college I had so much